Welcome back, everybody, to the 20-foot Jon Boat build, and we're replacing the transom. The previous video contains the portion where we laminate our two pieces of plywood together, and I'll post a link of that in the description below. Alright, here we're using a simple 1/4 inch roundover bit on my Bosch Pony router. And when I tell you I love this router, it makes such simple work out of these tasks. It's one-handable, if that's even a word, and it's simple to use, lightweight, all that sort of thing. Now we're rounding over the edges so that the fiberglass will lay down flat on the edges and not have any bubbles in it. In retrospect, I should have used a larger diameter roundover, but we made this work. It turned out all right. So, to the big jug and follow the directions on the manufacturer's label so you know how to properly mix the epoxy. Avery was the last girl out here. So go with the grain, brush it this way. Nice and slow. Look, keep the stick vertical, right? So brush it like this. You just move the stuff around and make it all look that. See how it looks like a wet color now? Mm-hmm. Make the whole thing look like that. I don't think you care about the project enough. I don't think this is worth it to you. You need to pick up your
I'm the one who got you up here faster.
That's a good point. I was about to sit around and just drink beer with the homies. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, I guess.
A little dry in here. Definitely gonna seal the engraver. The whole thing's gonna have glass over it. Apparently there's somebody out here smoking a cigar that wasn't paying attention where he's going to leave his cigar ashes. I don't know about you folks. Anybody have any idea who that might be? Oh, okay. A little penetrating epoxy. It's always been our basic philosophy that the penetrating epoxy soaks into the wood, and then when we put the regular epoxy on over that to put fiberglass down, it makes a chemical bond with the penetrating epoxy that's already deep inside the wood, and that gives us a stronger bond with the epoxy in the wood overall. That makes sense, little girl?
Huh?
Oh, jeez. Now we've got two pieces of Douglas fir marine grade plywood laminated together. It's about $100, $110 for the sheet. And the whole transom came out of one sheet. Wow. These shears are good, man.
Sheer is.
The sheer excitement of using these. Here's what I'm thinking. Once our penetrating epoxy has gotten tacky, we add a layer of regular epoxy to begin our layup.
It's like Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Like in 5,000 years, somebody's gonna find this transom. There's gonna be a fly in it. Like an extinct species.
The fly bit a person, and these weird oblong people that live on the planet are gonna clone one of us. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna show up fat, looking for beer to drink. He's now part of the project. His name was Darwin.
Darwin. Darwin X?
No, it's Darwin Charles.
Darwin Charles.
Put a new coat of epoxy on here to fill in some of the texture on the surface of the transom. So far, we've covered both sides of the transom with epoxy. Now it's time to do the edges and put a second coat of epoxy on the bottom side. So we've got fiberglass, epoxy, 2 coats on one side, 1 coat on the other side, and we still have to do the edges. After that, primer. Yeah, I know the sanding discs are too large, but I really like my new sander, and these are the ones I had. And because the sander costs like 400 bucks, I'm just going through these for now. Bosch, baby, for when you just don't want to spend the money on Festool. All right, 10 minutes later, I've trimmed off all the extra fiberglass now. Easiest way to do that is with the sander itself. Don't try to cut it off or any of that stuff. Just use the sander, go right along the edge where the epoxy lays, and it'll trim right off. Make sure your edges are still rounded, and I kind of rounded off the corners a little more so that the glass is laid down a little bit better. And 10 minutes later again, we've knocked down all the high spots and roughed the table up. You can kind of see where the high spots were, right? Where all the white blotching is. Now this isn't going to be finished grade by any stretch of the imagination, right? I'm not going to fill it with, you know, fairing compound or anything like that. Just make it nice enough so it looks like a board. Put 2 layers of primer on, and we'll sand between those coats so that'll flatten it out even further. But this transom is mostly going to be covered up in the back of the boat, so I'm not too concerned with looks. Just want it to be waterproof as well as possible. Waterproof and strong, of course. And so here is the literal flip side, and you can see it's needing that second coat of epoxy just to fill in the gaps and stuff between the fibers of the mesh. And I figured I should be able to do that and trim the edges with glass at the same time. Well, we'll see how that kind of works out. But I'm going to sand it, and you know, there's a few drips like that need to get cleaned up, and then I'll add some epoxy to that and some glass strips around the edges here. I don't know anything about this brand, but it's a 1 ounce chopped strand fiberglass mat, and it's made for use with epoxy. You want to be careful, don't get the wrong kind of chopped strand fiberglass mat. There's a bonding agent that holds these strands together. The epoxy has to dissolve it so that it'll bond properly, so that it'll really wet the product out. And if the epoxy can't dissolve that bonding agent, then it won't wet out the product fully and it will delaminate. Now I'm just chopping this about 3 inches wide. Have a little bit overhang on each side. And incidentally, these Fiskars scissors are outstanding. Just like about everything else Fiskars makes. But for cutting glass, these things go through them. Hot knife through butter, that sort of thing. All right, we got the other side sanded. Knocked it down pretty good. Knocked down all the high spots pretty good. I'm gonna make 1 batch of epoxy that should help me wet out all the sides, and then the rest I'm gonna put in the glass on this side. Kind of flatten it out a little more. Next step is wipe down with alcohol. I like alcohol. Acetone works too. Alcohol, it evaporates a little bit slower, so I get a little more working time with it on the rag, but it evaporates nonetheless, so there won't be any on the surface when I go to apply epoxy. All right, everything's been washed down with alcohol, and I've repositioned my sawhorses so I can get to all the edges at the same time and do this in 1 shot. The blood shepherds are on the job, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Well, it's ugly as hell, but it's on there. Little spots you see where the glass has been triple folded and stuff. Don't worry about all that. It'll sand out. The important thing is the edges are sealed. All right, we sanded all the way around the border of this thing. We're gonna fill it with some epoxy. We're getting ready for priming and paint. We have a distinct border all the way around. I'm just gonna fill this entire thing with epoxy. You can see that the cloth underneath, right? Could use a little bit of epoxy to fill it in. So we want to make this one big slick project, and so that's what I'm going to do right now. Make 1 batch of the resin, 5:1, fill it all in, let it all cure, and tomorrow it'll be ready to prime. Sound good? Well, I don't care what you think. And all we'll need is sanding in the morning. All right, you can see we got a little amine blush going on there, but it's still tacky, and lose a little fingerprint there. So I'm gonna go ahead and roll on some of that epoxy primer. We'll get a nice chemical bond instead of having to sand to achieve a mechanical bond. Chemical bond is gonna be a bit stronger, make our paint stick a little better. This is the product I'm gonna use, epoxy primer, barrier coat, 3-to-1 mix ratio. We're gonna mix up about 4 ounces and then add a little bit of brushing thinner. So up to this point, we've added penetrating epoxy, then regular epoxy, then fiberglass, then more epoxy, then more epoxy. All right, now we've got epoxy primer, barrier coat. And when this dries up, we'll flip it over to the other side, and then we'll be ready for paint after that. Earlier I said that the transom wasn't going to be visible, but we've changed our plans a little bit now that we know the transom is going to be visible to the rest of the boat. On the show side here, I've mixed up some 2-part epoxy filler, and it's another Total Boat product. It goes on nice and easy. It's blue and yellow, and you mix it up and it makes green. Just smooth it on nice and flat like drywall mud or whatever else. First coat of primer is on. It looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. So that's a second hot coat of primer going down. First coat was still tacky, so now we get a nice chemical bond. All right, so we've got 2 really good coats of primer on it. I'm gonna give it another sanding, clean it down a little bit, see what it looks like. And that's what happens when the primer's laid on too thick and hasn't had enough cure time. A little bit of yellow and blue makes green. It's sealed. Comment below, you know what that commercial was. I think it's very well done. I don't think Vidal Sassoon could touch that. We'll call that the autumn special. So we got the sides, got all the little indentations. So I've made a little oven, modified it here and there. Hopefully I can get this stuff cured up a bit so I can flip it over and finish paint the backside of it. Now I got chicken sneaking up on me. What makes you think there's gonna be something good to eat in here? About to do a final primer coat on the backside, cook it off in our little oven, and then put a coat of the finished paint on the back so we could stop looking at it and concentrate on the other side. All right, did a little sanding, have a fresh coat of a primer on the back side of the boat here. We're gonna stick it back in the oven, let it get tacky, and top coat it. It's perfect conditions to be top coated. Perfect. I couldn't have checked this at a better time. Nothing coming up on my fingers, but leaving fingerprints perfect. We're gonna coat the back side of this transom. It needs a few coats between it and the aluminum and the paint on that aluminum, so we have a nice barrier between both surfaces. Top coat's gonna be the wet edge, seafoam green. Amazon shipping got me all beat in like this. Look at this. Oh, pistachio ice cream. Let this color forever be known as Fat Guy Blue. That's my color. And it's back in the oven. Mike and I just did a wax paper boat flipperoo. Wax paper transom flip. It's not the best wax paper in the world for that, right? They say you're supposed to get the high dollar shit, but I don't care. It's the back of the transom and I need to get to work. Rolled on a fresh batch of primer. This is the show side of the transom. And there it is. Paint's laying down nicely even though I didn't put any brushing thinner in it. Oh, you bastard. You gotta expect that. Don't get stuck, dummy. Yeah, it's pretty good. That's pretty good. We're not going to be seeing this again until we mount it inside the aluminum boat there. That's coming up soon.